One of the leading causes of divorce is how a couple manages or mismanages their money. Tonight, we'll talk with an expert who will provide practical tips for managing money in marriage.
Welcome back to Living a Godly Marriage. I am Voncille Greene.
And I'm Melvin Greene.
Tonight we have back by popular demand, Andrea Jackson, a money coach. Welcome back to the show, Andrea.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I appreciate anytime I get an opportunity to talk about money, it's always great. So thank you for having me back. Thank you so much. It's always great to see you guys as well.
Yes, it's our pleasure.
Our pleasure. And as you know, money is a big topic in marriage. It's a cause of a lot of discussion, a lot of debate. And so we're looking for you to provide some tips to our couples and our viewers tonight.
Oh, it would be my pleasure. You're absolutely right. That's the number one cause of divorce. Mm-hmm. Even though most people think it's infidelity, it's not. It's money. Mm-hmm. And the inability to discuss it and work with it. So super excited tonight about having some tips to share with people about how to be a couple and be successful when it comes to money. So just very, very excited.
Great. So of course, the first question we have for you is, can you talk about the biggest issues that married couples have around money?
Well, I would say it really depends on the couple. But what I will say is that whenever somebody gets married, you have two people who literally grow up in two different households. And so they grow up in two different households. They learn to either respect or disrespect money. You may have a spender, you may have a saver. So one of the biggest challenges is that conversation is not clearly had prior to getting married. So when you walk into a marriage, you already know what you're getting into. And I think that sometimes people walk in expectation that other people act like them. And so it's like, oh, I'm a saver, so this person is a saver also. Or I have a good credit score, so this person has a good credit score also. And so the biggest problem, I would say, is the communication about how do you see money? Are you a saver? Are you a spender? And being very transparent about who you are in that particular relationship with money.
Because I know you've worked with many couples. What do you see as the biggest mistakes they make besides not communicating properly?
Well, the mistake from the communication actually leads to other stuff like spending. And so one of the biggest mistakes is the spending. And so, or not being on one accord, even when it comes to savings. And so when they're sitting down and they're thinking, and they're having conversations about money, they're not saying, hey, look, this is our goal. Another thing that I see, and this is a very controversial topic, is how folks manage accounts. And so whether or not they have separate accounts or joint accounts, because that becomes an issue as well. And so when I'm sitting down with couples, one of the things that I advise is that they have a joint account to pay all the household bills out of. It's okay to have separate accounts, but I think that you come into challenges when all the money, you sit down with people and it's like, well, he pays this and I pay that, and he pays this and I pay that. But they're literally household expenses that money could drop into one space. And then those particular bills can be paid out of that one space, not just because from a biblical space, not from a biblical standpoint, not just because of that, but also because now we can track our spending and we can track what we're doing. But as long as one person has an account and another person has an account and this person's paying bills out of this one, and then we're not on one accord when it comes to stuff like saving for our future, paying off debt. So things of that nature.
Right. So I just want to make sure I understand you correct. So a couple should have a joint account, but it's okay to have separate accounts.
Absolutely. I just
Yeah.
think the household bills, as absolutely, Voncille. I think the household bills should be paid out of a joint account.
Yes.
Yes, yes. And that's what we're talking about, is living a godly marriage. And in God's eyes, when you get married, the two become one. So
Right.
yes, the definitely having a single account. And sometimes it even goes deeper than that. Sometimes couples argue over, hey, this is my money versus your money, or your money is also my money.
It's all my money.
I feel like women only get that rap. That women are the only people that are said to say that your money is our money, but my money is my money. Now, I've never actually ever heard a woman say that. But we tend to get these raps, but I've never heard a woman say that.
Okay. And so I have another question. Even though we have our joint account and individual accounts, should we also share the passwords to those individual accounts as well?
Good question.
I mean, if it's absolutely, I mean, but to me, marriage is about trust.
Yes.
If you trust somebody enough to say, I'm going to spend my life with this person, the rest of my life, the only way out of this thing is feet first. I don't understand the challenge with the password say, because if at a basic level, I can't trust the person with a password, then we have larger issues than our money. And
Right.
so, and that's something that's going to take some therapist work, or I don't know, but yeah, that's just that. Now we're getting into a whole different other space when someone's like, you don't need to have access to my money. Like, because the problem is my money. It's not my money, it's our money. And
That's
so,
right.
and what are we, and what I was saying before is that if we have these goals and whatever we establish are our goals, then we're always working towards our goals, even if the way that we decide to approach it may be a little different.
Right.
But we're always still working towards our goals. And so we have to establish what those are. Do we want to be financially independent at a certain time? Do we want to be debt free and not burdened down by having a lot of debt? If we have a mortgage, do we want to pay off our mortgage? Like, these are conversations. Are we adequately protected in the area of life insurance? If one of us should happen to pass away, is that other person now going to be burdened because you never thought that was something that was needed? And so absolutely, we should have access to everything. It should be an open line of everything.
Yes,
Yes.
I agree.
Okay, well, let's break it down a little bit. Let's talk about young couples. What are the biggest mistakes you've seen them make?
Challenges there.
It still comes back to spending. And so with younger people, so I'll use, because Gen Zs are actually starting to get married early too. So they're getting married in their early 20s. And then you have millennials that go up to age 35, 36. But this is a young group that grew up in a certain space. And so they grew up in a space where waiting doesn't even make any sense, because they are used to getting everything they want right now. Some of them were helicoptered parented, or I don't even know if that's a word, but basically their parents did everything for them. So the biggest challenge when it comes to younger couples is having the ability to make an independent decision, because they could be old enough to get married, but literally many young people are still very attached to their parents when it comes to decisions. And so it's not that they can't seek counsel, because my goodness, you better seek wise counsel. But it should be a conversation with all three of them. It shouldn't be, well, my mama know more, my dad know more, so we're going to go to them. It should be a conversation, a qualified one. But when it comes to the spending thing, they like what they like. They like to brunch. Oh my goodness. I ain't never seen such. And their brunches cost $70 a head before drinks. So they will go and they will drop in a weekend $200-300 on brunch. Because that's what we do. We're foodies. I mean, it is absolutely amazing to talk to young people. They're foodies. And what I mean by that is they go to every restaurant on the gram. If so-and-so said it's a good restaurant, then I'm going, and I don't care how much it costs. And it just for the photo op. So I can say that I'm here. It don't matter. I just spent $150, but I was here. And this is,
Post it on Facebook.
oh my God, I got to put it on. What they no, so young people are not fooling with Facebook. That's what they go to Instagram and TikTok. They said Facebook for old people. And so, but with that, they're making their reels. And that's the point, but they spend a lot of money at brunch. A lot.
So Andrea, can you talk about some of the biggest issues that senior couples have, perhaps in a second marriage?
You know what? I was getting ready to say there's a difference between a senior couple that has been married for 50 years or 40 years and someone who's getting married in their 50s for the second time. Or I do have a client, they're on number 4. So it's a difference, but they're in their 50s. And so the difference is in when you're dealing with a marriage, it's longevity. And they've been married for like 40, 50 years. They've already established a routine. And many times it came from a space where the man was the breadwinner and he made more of the decisions. And so the wife was the helpmeet and she, filled in the gaps. But now when you're dealing with second marriages that are happening in their 50s, whoa, you're bringing a whole lot to the table. You're bringing 2 separate households that already exist. And what I mean by that, you're dealing with grown children. How do we divide up the assets? I just had this conversation with one of my clients. I said, her and her husband are in their late 60s and early 70s. And I was telling them it's imperative that you have a will in place. Y'all have a very blended family. He has kids, you have kids, there's assets, there's grandkids, and so when you're now dealing with a senior couple, still the same thing about how do we spend money. But the other thing that's coming to play is the blendedness of the family. Because you're not, for lack of a better word, you're not establishing a family. You're not getting married, having kids, and raising a family. You're on the other side of this thing. And so even your motivations as to why you get married, as crazy as it sounds, I know some older people that actually get married because it's cheaper. And so they feel like, then it's like totally off. It has nothing at all to do with what God says about marriage. But they're getting married because they'll go, they'll start talking about, if it's 2 of us trying to cover the mortgage, it's just cheaper as opposed to, 2 separate households trying to do this thing. And so even the motivations tend to be different. But the biggest issue really comes in when it comes to the division of assets and what happens when one of them passes away, which I do have a client, and it's a huge thing. Her father has 3 kids by his wife who's deceased. And those are the older kids. And then he got remarried. And there was 1 child out of that marriage. And that's who he's married to right now. And there's a big family issue going on because he's dealing with some mental health challenges at this point. And all the assets, that wife made sure that her child got all the assets. And so, you got to deal with that stuff while everybody is in their right mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it begins with having the conversation, being willing to talk about it with your spouse. Definitely
get married.
Because the issue becomes, what do you want to happen in case you pass, and you got to have that conversation, because if you don't, it really puts the widow or widower in a difficult situation without
a strain.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because today the most common marriage is forming a blended family where there are kids from one previous relationship, or both of them have kids from previous relationships. Okay, thank you. That's good information. Let's shift gears for a moment. How has the COVID pandemic changed how a couple manages their finances? What's different today than it was 3 or 4 years ago?
I would put it this way. I don't know if it's different, but I do know it's more obvious. One of the things that happened in COVID is you found people, for lack of it, stuck in the house. So you really got to see those habits. What are the things that people do? Eating became big. Just like if you think about children are getting ready to get out of school right now. Anybody who's ever had any children, they can relate to what I'm getting ready to say. They eat breakfast, they eat lunch, they eat dinner. But when they get out of school, they eat every 2 hours. For some reason, they just can't stop eating, and you can't keep any food in the house. Well, now you've switched to COVID, and now you got people in the house. Everybody's eating all the time. And so it still goes back to spending, whether you're spending grocery money, but people weren't, because they were Instacart made a killing. Folks had food being delivered to their homes, Uber Eats. I mean, just literally idle time, just eating all the time between that and Amazon. And you know that the purchases went up because Amazon, just in our area, opened up 4 different distribution centers.
Wow.
I say our area, I mean in Prince George's County. They opened up 4 different distribution centers in a small period of time that now they're having to close because they don't have the influx of people ordering because they're gone back to work. So the biggest impact that COVID had on households was so that was kind of the negative one, but here's the positive one. I literally had clients who went to happy hour all the time. And so because they could no longer go out, and it didn't have to be happy hour, clubbing, whatever. They couldn't get out the house. So the other side of it was people saw themselves saving more money, actually. And so their emergency accounts were going up because they weren't necessarily spending the money that they were using to go out. They were no longer using it. So they would just keep it in their savings account. And so some people did come out in a good space with a bunch of money saved. So it was 2 sides of it, but yeah, so kind of 2 sides of the same coin, but yeah.
Right. Well, you mentioned something that I want to pick up on. You mentioned savings account. And I know we've talked about this. Banks. I noticed, though people may be saving more, it seemed like the interest that banks are paying is decreasing. So what's your recommendation there? What can we do about a situation like that?
Okay, so interest rates rise and fall based on 2 things: inflation, and then what the Federal Reserve is doing with interest rates. So we literally went through a space, and we're coming out of it now, where inflation was at 8.5%. And so where's that? We're used to inflation hovering around 3%. It was at 8.5%. So and the feds were raising the interest rate, constantly trying to counter it. But here's what banks do in response to that. Banks now raise their interest rate. So you'll see it go from 0.02 to 2% to 3% to some people were getting almost like the highest one I saw was an online bank, and it was 5.5%.
Wow.
The issue is what you said. One, it's temporary. And so because it's directly related to inflation. So as inflation goes back down, so will that interest rate. And so it's directly related to that. And the second thing is it's people don't understand. It's not 5.5% every month. It's let's just say 5.5. It's 5.5% for the year. So if you divide that by 12, then that's how much you're getting credited every month. But remember, the first thing I said is that it's inconsistent. It's going to go back down. So you're really, really excited about having it in there. But when you go look and you're trying to figure out why is it changing? Oh, because it's going down. And so now when it gets back to, and I'm not sure, I don't think PNC ever changed. I don't believe that PNC and Bank of America ever changed their interest rate. Last time I looked, it was still 0.04. Like they were like, we ain't whatever. Like literally other banks are giving 5%, 4%, 3%, and you're giving 0.04. So yeah, that's a interesting space to save money.
So a couple should really search and look into this. What's a good website to search for that kind of information?
Well, let me be clear. Which type of information? Where they can get the interest rate?
Yeah. Like if I'm saving money in a bank, how can I find out the interest that I will get from saving that money?
Oh, okay. So there's a lot of different calculators. So you can do, I like NerdWallet, but you could do different calculators and it'll tell you your savings rate. The thing is, it always comes down to what's your goal. Everyone should have 4 types of accounts. Depending on how old you are, you may only have 3. But the first one, you got to have an emergency account. And that emergency money needs to be accessible. It needs to be liquid, but it doesn't need to be $90,000. And so what you need in there is, and this can exist in a bank because the purpose of that money is not to grow. That money is for emergencies. And so if something were to happen, I need to be able to access that money. And deal with stuff. But even in that, I typically advise my clients not to have over $3,000 just sitting in one space, because you're not typically going to have an emergency that's over $3,000. Then I tell them, well, let's talk about the wall of separation. So I may move their money into a mutual fund, but it'll be split between a money market mutual fund, which is not really getting a lot of interest, but it puts a wall of separation. Why is that wall needed? Because as long as I keep looking in my bank account and I see I have this money, it's a temptation to spend it. I don't really look at my brokerage statements that much. I kind of toss them to the side, so I won't be so focused and aware that I have this money sitting there. I also take some of that money and put it in a very conservative, maybe if they're older, I'll put it in what's called a municipal fund for an emergency account. But it's like I said, it's when you have an excess of 3,000 to 5,000, and now I'm starting to move money over, because in that municipal fund, you can actually get tax-free returns. So what I mean by that is, as your money is growing, you don't have to pay taxes on the growth of that money while it's sitting in that space, but it could be earning something. Even if it's 2 to 3%, it's still earning something. So I have my emergency monies, then I have my short-term money. Number 2 is my short-term. I call this a lifestyle account. You want to go on a trip, but it's going to be in the next 3 to 5 years. It's not something immediate, but I need to save for it. I want to put a down payment on a house. That needs to be in that wall of separation space, because if not, they're going to see it as money I can spend. So that needs to be put off to the side. Number 3 account everyone should have is some type of long-term savings or investment. So what that means is, whether it's retirement or education for the kids, it's a longer term. And now we can start talking about growth, because this money has time in and we can grow that money. And the last space that I talk to people about, which I said has to do with your age, is wealth building. Because once you start to accumulate $25,000 or more, now we can start talking about, how do I protect it? How do I put a protection on my 401k? Like, I know so many people, unfortunately, that I'm getting referrals from, because they leave jobs and they keep their money at the job. But I tell them, it's just like if you had an ex-boyfriend or an ex-girlfriend, would you keep your money in a joint account with them? No. This is your ex-job. You don't keep your money in a joint account with them. And so you also have no protection on it from the highs and the lows of the market. So when we start to talk about wealth building, now we're in a conversation about, how do we protect this principle? How do we make sure that this creates an income for the rest of my life? And so those are the 4 spaces, though, when saving, which is going to determine what type of interest am I getting. Is it the purpose to grow the money, or is the purpose to just have the money? And so that is a very, very important conversation that I have with my clients, because I want to make sure that they're in the right position.
Okay. I want to go back. You mentioned earlier a couple of things I want to pick up on. One is exit planning, or having a will. Why is that really important for any couple?
Exactly, for any person. Until you go through someone passing away, you literally do not know all the red tape, all the drama, all the stuff that is attached to that. And we can make it easier. And what I mean by that is, I do something called a financial inventory with some of my clients. They have to have something to put in it. But the financial inventory is basically writing out, what do we have, so that there's one space that my relatives can go to and they see everything. They see, so if let's take you and Voncille, God forbid one of y'all pass away, then I have one space to go to, and I can see every account number when it comes to the banks. I can see what life insurance I have in place. I can see everything, because when someone passes away, you're mourning. Mm-hmm. You're not necessarily in the right mind, depending on how they passed away. And then now you're dealing with financial stuff. I had a client, unfortunately, her dad passed away from COVID. So it's very unexpected, but he left her a house. but they hadn't had a conversation about money. So he left her a house. She's the only child. Well, for the outside, well, that sounds good. He actually left her a paid off house. The problem was that the house was dilapidated. So she had to put all this money. He was used to living in the house. So, but it was stuff that just was crazy that she had to get fixed. So he had a small insurance policy. And so she used the money. She took care of his final expenses, but then she used the money to start fixing the house. Well, a creditor rose up. Well, a few of them did. But the only one that took her to court was a small dental company. Because see, the rest of them was large credit card companies. They don't care. They just write it off as bad debt. But it was this very small dental company, and he owed them money. And so they came after her and that house, and ultimately she ended up having to go into her retirement to pay them off, because otherwise they were going to have to sell that house. But these are the things that can happen because people aren't thinking about he didn't have a will. He didn't have a trust. On the flip side, my girlfriend just passed away, and her husband had a trust. Everything filtered into the trust. They created everything. They have 2 daughters. And so everything pays out to the husband and the 2 daughters, no questions. It is seamless, as opposed to all the back and forth with the family. We can see with the celebrities, this tells you something right here. Just because you make money doesn't mean you know how to manage it. When these celebrities pass away, it's crazy how many of them don't have a will in place. You are worth multi-million dollars, and you don't have something as basic as a will or a trust in place for your relatives. Do you know Prince's birthday was yesterday, so I'll bring him up. He's been deceased for 4 years. They just settled his estate this year.
Wow.
And a third of the money went to the lawyers for probate stuff.
Yeah. So that's it. Yeah, that's why couples have got to have conversations. And something you said earlier, because we have to know what we don't know and get the proper counseling so that there's another party joining this conversation to advise us. So we only have a minute left. Can you tell us how can people reach you? We're going to have your information in the credits, but please tell us.
Okay. Well, they can reach me either 2 ways. I tell them they can go to my website, which is just Andrea Lewan, which is my first and middle name. So AndreaLewan.com. And there's a contact sheet at the bottom of that if they want to reach me that way. They can also reach me at my email. That's a little more goofy, but Andrea Lewan Associates, is one word, @gmail.com. They can reach me that way. My telephone number, when you put it up, will be up. And they can also reach me that way. They can leave a message. I will call them back within 24 to 48 hours. But yes, those are the best ways to contact me, with either my website, or my phone number probably being the best too.
Well, Andrea,
Okay.
thank you very much for coming back on the show. Again, you're back by popular demand, so don't be surprised if we call you back a 3rd time, because you give great information. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us.
And we also want to thank our viewers for watching. And as we always like to close, living a godly marriage is the best marriage. God bless you. See you next time.
How you doing?
Hey, Mason.
Hey, Mason. Thank you.
a place to make my own, a place that I call home, this place that I call home.